Chapter 5 A Wonderland Experiment. Red didn't catch sight of Chester for the rest of the day, though she looked for him in riddles, etiquette, and principles of card mastery. She scanned the grounds as she headed to the croquet field for her gym class, the final period of the day, and thought she saw a toothy smile in the shadows of one of the trees that bordered Wonderland High's green lawn. But when she looked closer, nothing was there. Red was gathering her things after school and wondering how she was supposed to do Maddox's project when Chester appeared on the other side of her locker door. "Hearts!" Red exclaimed. "Do you really need to sneak up on people like that?" "Sorry," Chester grinned. "Bad habit. Are you ready to do this project?" Red hefted her book bag over her shoulder. "Are you? I couldn't figure out where you disappeared to all day. You want to do run-of-the-mill magic or potions?" Chester asked. Red frowned. Then she said decisively, "Potions." "Good." Chester began to stroll in the direction of Maddox's lab room, hands in his pockets. "Our schedules didn't quite line up," he said, explaining his absence, "but I do have a tendency to slip away. It was all a bit much for the first day. To be honest, I got a little bored." Red stopped short. "You didn't cut class, did you?" Chester smirked. "What? Would you tell on me if I did?" Red opened her mouth, then closed it again. She frowned. A Wonderland kid talking back at her was a strange, almost unsettling feeling. "No, honestly, I'd be very impressed. I don't think anyone's had the gut to cut class before." Chester shrugged, and they both continued walking. "Sitting straight up in a hard chair all day isn't really my style. I don't know how everyone does it." "Don't you know what the punishment is?" Red asked. "For any misbehavior?" "Spades, I can't believe you didn't get caught." "What?" Chester snickered. "Will it be off with my head, only to have it put back on upside down?" "Couldn't have that. I'd never be able to read a clock properly again." Red rolled her eyes. "No, silly. You have to sit in a room and write my mother's mission statement 100 times. That doesn't sound so bad. It's not bad, and I can say this, nightmarish." She contracts herself, goes on tangents. "Wonderland is a mansome place of imports and exports, unswings and downspouts. The castle of the Queen of Hearts aims to improve the lives of all its citizens through fumarious legislator that callows every toad butler and callies each jub bird." "Huh." Red shook her head, feeling an ache coming on just thinking about it. "It's complete nonsense, enough to tie anyone's brain in knots. If you've committed a really serious offense, you have to write an essay about what it means along with all the repetition. I think I can handle a little penmanship." "We'll see about that," Red grumbled. She'd never experienced such a form of discipline herself, but she knew better than anyone how frustrating the Queen's words could be. She actually lived with the Queen. They reached the classroom, and Chester held the door for her. Maddox left the space open as a way to encourage the students to come in and out freely to conduct research and experiments. Luckily, nothing inside was very dangerous, but of course all the other Wonderland High kids went promptly home after school, so they had the place to themselves. Chester put his hands in his pockets and leaned against one of the lab tables. "Can I ask you something?" "What?" Red said warily. "If your mother's dictates are so unpopular, haven't you ever talked to her about changing them?" Red let out a sharp, surprised laugh. She decided then that she didn't mind the talking back or the ripping. This kid was naive as a new tum-tum tree, and it was kind of endearing. "Oh, Chester, was it? You really don't understand. You can't just talk to the Queen of Hearts. No. Her word is law. You can only, sneak around it." As a child, Red had taken particular issue with a new edict that said no children could have a snack before bedtime. When she'd broached the topic with her mother had simply ignored it, as if Red hadn't spoken at all. In the end, Red gave it up. It was exhausting to be treated as invisible. Chester set his own book down on the lab table. But why do people listen to her at all? Red shrugged. I guess you could do whatever you want when you're that powerful. I suppose, Chester sighed and took out his textbook. Don't those soldier cards ever think for themselves? It's their job not to. The subject of her mother was a sensitive one, so Red changed the topic. Now, magic. Magic and science. Where shall we start? I've always been a fan of the classics, Chester said, flipping open his potions book to the page that read, For shrinking or growing. And I never got a chance to do this basic stuff at home. My parents didn't have access to these kinds of ingredients. He eyed Maddox's shelves of mysterious vials and tinctures, and it was Red's turn to grin. Fair enough, she said. She pulled a few things off the shelf. Worm fat, coins from a dead man's pocket, witch's spit, wishful thinking, what any good Wonderlandian should have in hand. Okay, Red put everything on the table. Now let's see. I don't know about all this. Chester scratched his head, batting a hand against his ear. Science, I understand. More or less. But how is all this junk supposed to change your physical size? You know, Mr. Maddox says the lines between science and magic are very thin, Red said, lighting the Bunsen burner and peering at the time-tested recipe in her textbook. Is magic just science that we can't explain yet? Or is science a form of magic that we try too hard to overanalyze? That makes my head hurt, Chester said. I bet that's his goal for this assignment, Red muttered. Wait, what? Aren't you supposed to put the wishful thinking in before the witch's spit? Red chewed her lip. I didn't think so, but the order isn't very specific here. I thought you were, Chester frowned. So the thinking has time to boil down, right? At least that's how I've always seen how people do it. How often are you watching other people make shrinking potions? Mr. I never got a chance to do the basic stuff. I don't know. In the stories and such, I guess. Well, I already put 1 teaspoon in. Red trailed off. How about we do one now and one later? Chester shrugged. It can't make that much of a difference. Red raised her eyebrows and shrugged back. Then they both dumped a whole host of other goops and serums into the bubbling pot. An indescribable and specific smell, like a bowl of soup eaten on the right-hand side of the table, while it's raining outside during the month of May, soon permitted the classroom. Red switched off the flame and stirred carefully, dipping a spoon into the mixture. Want to try, she said. Wish me luck. Chester downed the whole spoonful in one gulp. He said. That's strange. It tastes very large. How can something taste large? But suddenly, Chester's left hand ballooned to the size of a basketball. Ah! He cried. His voice broke and deepened halfway through as his chest buffed up, and his head swelled. Clubs! He managed to say, shaking his large head as the rest of his body changed proportions and began to grow. What's happening? Red gasped, forcing back a bubble of laughter that threatened to burst in her chest. We might have done something wrong. You think? Red flipped through the textbook, looking desperately for an answer as Chester's head grazed the ceiling. He was proportioned normally now, but still getting bigger and bigger. He sat on the floor, ducking the swinging overhead lights. Okay, Red said. Salamander's eye, borogo feather. This should help. But as she stirred recklessly, some of the potion splashed onto her face. She coughed, inhaling the fumes. Chester began to grow even larger. In fact, so did the entire room and the lab table, and Red groaned and slapped her forehead. I'm getting smaller, aren't I? Chester nodded rapidly and pressed his lips together. Red lunged for the Bunsen burner, but fell short. Suddenly no taller than a toddler. I can't reach, she cried. Here, let me, Chester began, but with one giant hand he knocked the whole contraption and all the vials off the table. The potion splattered with great ceremony on one of his pant legs. "Are you okay?" Red yelped, covering her face. "Poof!" Chester snorted, watching his left leg and left leg alone compressed down to a smaller than regular size. His pant leg hung loosely around it. "We are bad at this." "Okay, well, at least it's all down here," Red said, hefting the burner upright and standing on her tiptoes to plug it back into the outlet. She was careful not to touch any of the liquid that had fallen out. "Let's see, maybe if we just do everything in the reverse order." Chester held his hand over his wide mouth, eyes twinkling. "Then we can somehow get ourselves back to normal again." Chester nodded quickly and made a choking noise. "What?" Red said, annoyed. "I'm sorry, you're being so serious right now, but you look," and he burst out laughing, booming through the classroom. "You look like a little 2-year-old with a play set. I just can't." Red wanted to be mad, but suddenly a snort forced its way through her nose. "Oh, come on," she half cried, half laughed. But it was true. The beakers were as big as water pitchers in her diminished hands, and the Bunsen burner was like a stove before her. "Teeny tiny," Chester squawked, pinching his thumb and forefinger together and squinting through them. Red lost it. Soon they were both roaring with laughter, clutching their sides and gasping for breath. It was only after many minutes of trying to pull themselves together and then dissolving again that they managed to measure out all the ingredients and give the potion another go. And it still took many more sessions of trial, error, and wildly fluctuating limb size before Red and Chester were back to their normal selves again. "Well, my mouth feels a bit larger than usual," Chester said, jutting out his chin and grinning toothily. "But that just means I'll be able to eat sandwiches easier." "Good enough," Red chuckled. "Do you think we have enough to write a report on science versus magic?" "I do," Chester scratched on his head. "I want to say the magic was unpredictable, but the outcomes did change based on which ingredients we used and the order in which we mixed them." "And we did eventually succeed in the end," Red mused. "So there was a method to our madness, so to speak." "That certainly sounds like it would earn us a Maddox A+. They cleaned the lab equipment and put it away, then packed up their things. The school grounds were quiet and empty, and felt even more so after their messy ruckus experiment. Even the mome rats had deserted the school grounds. "You know," Chester said as they continued down the path, "if we'd gotten that potion right on the first try, we wouldn't have learned a thing. I've been thinking about the relationship between science and magic ever since we left the lab, but I know I wouldn't be if our goof hadn't happened." "I always thought science was science and magic was magic," Red agreed. "But maybe it's more complicated than that." "Most things," Chester said quietly, "are not black and white." Red glanced at him, wondering if he was referencing the inescapable black, white, and red palette of her mother's castle. But he was watching the path ahead, apparently lost in thought. "I'm sorry for calling you Red Scare," he said suddenly. "That wasn't very nice. You're not the least bit scary like your mom." "Ha!" Red said. "It's no big deal. I thought it was sort of funny. I'm sorry for getting so defensive about my role, too." "Well, you're allowed to. You don't like it very much, do you?" Red sighed. "Is it obvious?" "Maybe not to everyone, but you can always break out of a role, if you want to." "I'm trying. You sort of seem like someone who has that down." Chester glanced at her. "It's a blessing and a curse. I could help you out sometime, if that's something you're interested in." They were at the fork where the path broke off toward the Queen's castle. They stopped and regarded each other carefully. Red thought about her plans for more rebellion and how little time she had to carry them out. "I am," she said, lifting her chin. "All right then," Chester nodded. "I'll see you tomorrow, Red." "See you tomorrow." She watched Chester wave and go along down the darkening path, his wide grin glowing slightly in the dusk before disappearing entirely.